There was always that guy in class losing his pen, couldn't find his pen. I'm guessing that was Jeremiah Smith, maybe. All right. I'm hearing that he finally found it and that it's signed, it's delivered, although I'm not seeing indication on a number of recruiting lists. But want to see that check mark. I'm sure a lot of Buckeye fans go from national letter of intent to actually signed and sealed and off that commitment list. The saga of one Jeremiah Smith, but he's supposed to be worth it, folks. And there we go. Buckeyes live right here at the Voice of College Football. We've got the crew together here one day past National Signing Day to wrap it all up for us. Steve Hellwagon, Bucknuts 247 Sports, Tony Gerdeman below me, Buckeye Huddle, and of course the podcast is Buckeye Weekly, folks. Lock in on that. And the Big Me podcast, courtesy Kevin Noon and BuckeyeHuddle.com as well. All right, guys, you made it. I was telling Steve before we started to record, I said, Steve, stop complaining. This, if you covered an SEC team, this is what it would be like every year. You'd have like 4 or 5 of these guys flipping back and forth.
Yeah, it was a crazy day, no doubt. I've called it the National Signing Day from hell. I mean, for Ryan Day and his staff, they came into the day with 21 commitments that they were hoping to sign, and they ended up signing 20 of them. Jeremiah McClellan, wide receiver, national top 50 player from St. Louis, defected and went to Oregon, although that had been kind of leaning that way for a while. Then it looked good for Ohio State, and then finally it was Oregon. So, however, those negotiations worked out. McClellan's going to go play for Dan Lanning at Oregon and going to play against Ohio State in the Big Ten. And yes, in fact, next year Ohio State at Oregon, so he'll get a chance, potentially to play against the team he was committed to. 2 commitments who were wavering and looked like they were gone, possibly. One of them was Edric Houston, defensive end from Buford, Georgia, one of only 2 defensive line signees in this class, along with, I think it's James Mensah or Eric Mensah from Virginia. And Houston, another national top 50 player, it was rumored was going to switch and sign with Alabama. In fact, Steve Wiltfong changed his crystal ball prediction on Tuesday night, and it seemed like he was all but gone to Alabama. So during Coach Day's press conference yesterday, he took a break about 25 minutes in, walked out of the room, and took a phone call, and it was Edric Houston was on the other line, and they had to, basically talk him into the boat at the 11th and a half hour there to get him to announce at 1 p.m. Eastern time that he was, in fact, going to sign with Ohio State. So that worked out well. And earlier in that hour, they finally got the word that Jeremiah Smith, who had committed to Ohio State in December of 2022, over a year ago, whatever it was, and he was wavering. Florida State, Miami were trying to sway him to go and stay in state. He's from Hollywood, Florida, which is on the north side of Miami there. And, they were trying to get him to stay in his home state and play there. And finally, the negotiations ended up with Ohio State landing him. He announced it at a press conference with an Ohio State hat, but never sent the letter in until about 9 or 9:30 p.m. I was getting ready to go to bed. It's close to 10 p.m. last night. And finally, Ohio State tweeted out that it had received the letter of intent finally. Usually those things happen immediately after the announcements. Somebody goes to the school office and either, emails the PDF or faxes a copy of it to the school, and that's how they get it. So, but all's well that ends well. Ryan Day talked about how the first beer would taste very good last night, and I'm sure it did. Somebody asked him what brand he drinks. He says, "I don't care, cold," is what he said. And that's kind of my feeling too on beer. It doesn't really matter to me as long as it's good and cold. So there you go. But that was in a nutshell, the National Signing Day from hell. And certainly there were a lot of behind the scenes discussions that probably involved a lot of zeros that got thrown in there to get these guys to end up the way that they did.
Yeah, it all came together early in terms of like 17 of the players or so had their letters of intent in by 9:30, something along those lines. We were on the air for 7 hours yesterday. We were going to wait until Jeremiah Smith got his letter of intent, and we made the executive decision at, I think it was 4 o'clock, to say, nope, we're done at that point. And that was probably one of our best decisions in doing so. Ohio State not done per se in terms of recruiting, still going after Dominic Kirks out of the state of Ohio, who's committed to Washington. Unless something has changed here recently, Kirks is not signed there. Ohio State has certainly gotten in his ear and has made, there have to be some thought and decision there. And Dominic Kirks didn't have to sign yesterday. This is a signing period, so there's a couple days for here, and then he could always push it back into the traditional signing period, which starts in February. I think nationally there wasn't a ton of drama. There were flips, as there always are going to be. I think the biggest name out there, name that Ohio State was involved with, Jordan Seaton, the offensive lineman originally out of DC, who went to IMG Academy, committed on national television to Colorado, and then immediately the news came out that he was still looking around. So it just kind of goes to show you that commitments don't necessarily mean anything. Maryland seems to be a team that has a little bit of momentum. Obviously, the proximity to Washington, D.C. I know somebody in Steve's network at 247 had put in a crystal ball for Maryland. So, we'll see there. I mean, I think Ohio State did very well at certain positions in terms of hitting its numbers and the kids that it landed. There are positions, certainly defensive line, where it came well short of the number that it needed to get to. Obviously, Dom Kirks would help there. Steve has labeled this the signing day from hell, but I will remind people that I worked for a network for a long time where our sites crashed on 2 out of 3 national signing days. Those were signing days from hell. When that happens, when you have all this information and you have nowhere to say it because your site is offline. It was a long signing day. I'm glad that we've put it behind us. Strangely enough, Ohio State plays a game in 8 days. Nobody's really talking about that. We got the portal. Lots going on still. Everybody's like, oh, you should be able to absolutely just, mail it in for a couple of days after signing day. Not the case in this instance.
No, not this time of year. I think the main thing for me, the main takeaway for me is the defensive line numbers. Just getting 2 guys, and we'll see if they get that third. But Ryan Day saying that it's not really a concern because they want 8 defensive ends and 8 defensive tackles on the roster. And the way things are sounding right now, they may get all of their juniors back, so that will help those numbers. But I still think they fell short of what they wanted. And it was interesting doing this whole 7-hour show yesterday because the tone at the first half of the show was not great. The tone for the second half of the show obviously got better with the signing of Edric Houston and the recommitment of Jeremiah Smith. So when you don't lose those guys, when you're able to hold on to those guys, and really you only lose one guy in Jeremiah McClellan, I think that's a pretty good day, and it should be treated as such. I saw somebody mention the needing depth on the offensive line. David Greenshield, they got 4 guys last year. They got 4 guys this year. My concern for the past couple of years has just been the elite left tackle has not necessarily been in there. I think they got a left tackle this year in Deontay Armstrong, who might be the only left tackle. And then you've got a bunch of right tackles and guards. So we'll see how they do with those 4 and the 4 last year. So I think the numbers are okay. You just got to be able to develop those guys. And will they have enough running backs? Obviously, they wanted 3, they got 2. With the way running backs have been injured at Ohio State the last couple of years, if they just go into the season with 4, with assuming Trevion Henderson is back, which we don't know for sure, him and Dallin Hayden and James Peoples and Sam Williams-Dixon, is that enough? Generally, it is. Generally, the third running back really won't get many carries at Ohio State. But, Ryan Day talking about guys that he expects to be instant impacts, being Edric Houston and James Peoples. Couldn't mention Jeremiah Smith. I would assume that we could go ahead and throw him in there as well. So we'll see how quickly all of those guys get on the field. I also thought it was interesting talking about Demarion Witten, who is a tight end, but he played receiver and quarterback at Glenville because he's such a ridiculous athlete, and played wide receiver at the All-American game that they just had, the Army All-American game, and caught like 3 touchdowns. And so it'll be interesting to watch his development, because it sounds like he's too good of a player right now to be a developmental tight end, where it takes, he's probably like 210, 215 pounds right now. So it's going to take him 3 years to get where they want him to be size-wise. But you don't want to go 3 years without playing him. So it'll be interesting to see how they use him over the next few years until he is what they want him to be.
Kevin, are there any guys maybe a little bit further down the board that you are a little higher on than maybe most?
There's some guys that I'm really intrigued with seeing what they are. I think one of the biggest, as the dog decides now to bark in the background, Leroy Roker, the safety out of Fort Myers. You put in his tape and you see, and I hate to make this comparison because we're talking about somebody who played the position so well for 1 year at Ohio State. You see some Malik Hooker in him. You're talking about somebody who really was a basketball player as well, was averaging like 15 and 5, if I don't have the numbers in front of me in basketball, but being 6'1", $170, that doesn't necessarily really have you stand out in basketball as much as what he could potentially do in football. I'm kind of going down the list. I really like Garrett Stover, Cade Stover's cousin. Where he really lines up, we'll kind of see at that point. He played a lot of safety in high school, had moved down to linebacker, fast type of guy. But I mean, he needs to work on his aggressiveness because he's too aggressive and overruns plays. But I think that there could be a lot there. And, I guess I'm intrigued too by Eric Mensah, the other member of the defensive line. He's listed as a defensive tackle, 6'3", 290 or so. People will just assume that, he's a 3. I mean, I think he could be, a 1. He would be nice to have in a rotation with Caden McDonald. Ohio State still running its 4-man front at this point. So, we'll see. I think there's a lot of guys that I'm really intrigued by in this class. I mean, we did capsules on all of them. So, I think I've said all the words that exist in the world about all 20 of the guys who have signed for Ohio State. I was like, oh boy, now I'm going to get on Mark's show and I'm going to have to try and find things to say that are different because I've said everything else. But it's funny what the perspective is, because I've seen Ohio State listed amongst winners of National Signing Day, and Ohio State actually was -1 net in terms of what it got, 21 down to 20. But I guess everybody's considering it a win because it held on to Edric Houston. It held on to Jeremiah Smith. So, I don't know if I'm necessarily going to say that Ohio State was one of 4 or 5 national winners per se in terms of what happened. Ohio State slid from the number 2 class in the nation to the number 5, just based on other classes flipping and signing guys and moving up. But it still was a very good day compared to what it could have been.
And hasn't that been a narrative that we see most years, where Ohio State's in that 2 or 3 range, and then there's a mad rush by a few teams, typically from the SEC, and maybe Ohio State drops a spot or 2 and they finish 4 or 5?
Well, the thing to remember is that Ohio State 2 weeks ago was in position to finish number 1. Ohio State still had a chance of getting Karan Jones, still had a chance of getting Amaris Williams, still had a chance of – there were more players on the board. Everybody thought that Ohio State's class could get up to 26, 27, 28 players. Ohio State is sitting at 20 right now. So, you know, there's a perspective there. But, you know, Ohio State generally finishes top 3 nationally, top 3, top 4. I don't have the data in front of me at this point.
I'm looking at it
really well at the beginning and then kind of fizzles at the end. And it's, I mean, not normally a case of losing a bunch of kids, but those, you know, within, you know, 24 hours of signing day decisions don't normally go Ohio State's way.
Yeah, this is the 4th or 5th year in a row they're going to have a top 5 class. The only year under Day that they didn't was in the transition from Meyer to Day for the 2019 class that ended up like 14th nationally. I think every class since then, so this is 5 in a row, is going to be top 5. And that's how you win 11 games every year, 12 games, get in the playoff is stack one great class on top of another. Looking at the rankings, Georgia is 1 with 28 commitments and 4 5-stars. Alabama is number 2 with 25 commitments and 3 5-stars. Miami is number 3 with 27 commitments and 2 5-stars. And then there's Ohio State at number 4 with 20 commitments, 5 fewer than anybody ahead of them, and 5 5-stars, which is more than anybody else on the board as it stands right now. 5 guys that are 5-star players. And the Buckeyes just did a bang-up job, I think. And that's Jeremiah Smith, Air Noland, Edric Houston, Mylan Graham, and one more that I'm drawing a blank on that was also a 5-star.
Aaron Scott.
Aaron Scott, thank you, the corner from Ohio. So, yeah. To me, I'll dovetail off Mark's question. I was asked on a radio show this morning, like, if I had to like go beyond, what everyone's going to say, Jeremiah Smith and Air Noland, what do I like about this class? I like those 2 corners, because when you have lockdown corners, it changes everything you can do defensively. And Mark Porter from Scouting Ohio works with us. And he's been following Aaron Scott, since a freshman year. He said he was intriguing. He was 6 foot tall, and then he was 6'1", and then he was 6'2". And he says, I think he might be 6'3" as a corner, which is almost unheard of, with long arms and can be a lockdown type guy. And then you also get Bryce West from Cleveland Glenville in this cornerback class. And you get Miles Lockhart, who they talk about could come in, probably be a 3rd type corner as the nickel corner type guy, who I watched his tape. He is not a throw-in by any means. He's a football player. He's like a national top 150 player from Arizona, and he committed at mid-year last year. So this cornerback class, for me, we had somebody on our site post, this is the crappiest, and that wasn't the word that they used, crappiest defensive class that he can recall. And yeah, Mensah and Edric Houston, and then Peyton Pierce, they only got 3 guys in the front 6, or front 7 between defensive line and linebackers, but 3 corners, 3 safeties. And, that kind of plays to what Jim Knowles wants to do, I suppose. But they do, 3 straight losses to Michigan predicated on getting trampled by the defensive line, getting trampled. Could have used some help up front.
And real quickly, before we get to any of the super chats, the 2019 class may have been lowly ranked, but that doesn't include Justin Fields and Jonah Jackson out of the transfer portal. And the lowest ranked recruit in that class is DeJuan Jones. So still a pretty good
He's in the
haul.
National Football League.
Well, he's with Cleveland.
Now, doggone it, and I wanted to say something else there. Doggone it. We're 9-5, and we're playing Houston this week to get without Stroud to get to 10-5, and could clinch a playoff spot as early as this weekend if things fall our way. And then we've got people saying, well, if they clinch, should they rest Flacco? I'm like, do you want the 7th seed? No, keep going.
Joe Flacco to the rescue. Reminds me of Don Strock many years ago.
Yes.
Bernie
He was to the
Kosar goes
rescue.
down.
He rescued us once.
Yeah.
Gary Danielson played that scab game. That was big.
Back to Miles Lockhart real quick. He's a guy that is a pretty tremendous athlete. Also was running back for Basha, just doing whatever he needed to do, and comes in knowing he wants to play that nickel spot, and that's been something they recruited him to do. So I always like those guys that realize where they fit in best and they attack that. And sometimes with the nickel, everybody wants to play outside, like everybody wants to be a left tackle. Some guys are better suited to be right guards and nickel backs. And with the way the game is going, you see first rounders get selected to play nickel all the time now.
Ohio State does have the second highest player per rating average, just behind Georgia, just ahead of Alabama. And I also noticed in this class, and I mentioned this last night and made this a topic in our Miami show, is that even though it's an impressive class, 18 3-stars. And certainly there are going to be 3-stars who turn into prominent players, but the odds say that most of them won't. They'll be fill-in players. They'll be decent starters. They'll be that type of player. And Miami with 18 and everybody else around them is in that 3 to 8 range of 3-stars. So they loaded up on that end to build up their class in sheer numbers. All right, folks. Let's see. I'll take my cue from Tony here. Here comes Santa Dawes. Here comes Santa Dawes. Ryan Dawes, thank you so much. Let's get right to it. Bingo. Ryan, thank you so much for your contribution there. Merry Christmas, gentlemen. Santa Dawes strikes again. Tony is saluting you and giving you a bit of a toast there.
Yes. Thank you very much, Ryan. As always, we always appreciate it.
All right. We also have chiming in David. Thank you so much for your contribution. Has the demise of Larry Johnson been exaggerated?
No.
Expound.
All I want to say is no. Ryan Day certainly was asked about Larry during the presser yesterday, and it didn't sound like Larry was going anywhere, but it also doesn't sound like Ohio State is leaning into the problem and signing him to a longer-term deal to try and dissuade some of the negative recruiting about his age of being 71 years old and how much longer is he going to do it. And recruits love stability. And you can really get into their heads and be like, I know for a fact that was something that Alabama and Clemson were using against Ohio State in terms of trying to flip Edric Houston. I mean, how long is Larry going to do it? And people are like, well, Nick Saban is 72. Well, there's a difference between the head coach and your position coach. And I do think, too, to a certain extent that it's not fair to hold everybody to the standard of Bosa, and Young. The wealth management fund of those 3 young men right there. But, Ohio State hasn't necessarily had the type of results from the defensive line in terms of the most obvious production numbers, sacks and TFLs and things of that nature. So, and I guess the last thing too is that Larry is still a 4-down front type of guy, and we're really seeing a lot of teams move to 3 down. And I think that if Jim Knowles were given his druthers, he would probably rather have more of a 3-3-5 type of situation than the 4-2-5 that they're running right now. So. I do think that Ohio State has to have some sort of plan in place for what life after Larry looks like in terms of being a position coach at Ohio State. I think that, we can go back to the class of 23. Ohio State was in on 3 of the nation's top defensive ends right at the end. Ohio State goes 0 for 3. Ohio State does land Edric Houston, which is a huge get, but Ohio State has and then loses Justin Scott. Ohio State doesn't get Dylan Stewart. Ohio State doesn't get Marquise Lightfoot. I think we run into the same situation with the class of 25 because Larry isn't getting younger. He's getting older. So I think that the demise of Larry Johnson, I don't know if I want to use the word demise, but I do think that there is more of an issue as each year passes of the hurdles that it presents for Ohio State, because as long as you keep signing Larry to one-year deals and everything else, it's really easy to recruit against them.
I think there's 3 parts to this. I think the first part is he needs help with recruiting, which is a strange thing to say for a guy that has been outstanding. And by that, I mean, if you're going to go and pinpoint 5 great defensive ends in the country, you need to give him the financial support to go sign, a couple of the great defensive ends in the country. So, we don't talk dollars and cents in terms of recruiting a whole lot, but that is fast becoming what the whole game's all about. And, the sooner everybody embraces it, I guess the better off everybody's going to be. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is development. I think that, these guys come in they're blocks of clay, and he gets his hands into them and has to develop them and has to make them. I mean, Joey and Nick Bosa were, gifts from God the day, that they were born, but they weren't NFL players until Larry Johnson put his stamp on them. And so, we got to get back to that Midas touch of taking JT Tuimoloau off the hoof and Jack Sawyer off the hoof of what they are as high school players and make them All-American college players. And that hasn't happened here in the last several years. And that could be that maybe JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer just aren't cut out to be Nick Bosa and Joey Bosa. Very few people are, but at least give me half their production or something like that. And then production's that third part. It's like it's got to manifest and translate to something real on game day. You can't allow the Michigan quarterback to stand in the pocket for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and find his crappy receivers, who, don't have any business making these kind of plays against Ohio State. Well, they make them because the quarterback's got all day. And so you put a great secondary in place. You have adequate linebackers, but you don't change the game up front on defense. And it's been this way now 3 straight years. You've been chewed up and spit out by Michigan. Those who do not learn from the past are condemned to repeat it. So to me, Ryan Day, Dave Biddle asked him straight out from our company, are you happy? Has the recruiting offensive and defensive line been what it needs to be to win at the highest level? And he hemmed and hawed, really didn't answer the question. And, then he got into Larry Johnson a little bit. And, he does expect him to come back, says he brings energy. The players love him, et cetera, et cetera. But, the results also need to be there. And I think that he needs help. He needs, he brings Kevin just – one of the things that Coach Day said was he brings wisdom. So with wisdom don't pay the bills. So they got to get back to producing on game day and changing the game, and they just don't do that. They just don't seem to make that kind of impact.
Along those same lines, here we've got the appropriately named Dredd Roberts. Too much stargazing at Ohio State. How's that worked out the last 3 years? Need better players, evaluations, less 247 ratings.
How's it worked out for Georgia?
Well, not yeah, exactly. So not that there's not some truth there. Yes, there are some issues with the program. There are some things that need to be fixed. They're not firing on all cylinders. However, having worse recruiting classes is not the answer. Having
Well,
Yeah,
I mean, Ohio State would have recruit better on. I mean, it's had years upon years where it's stacked bad offensive line classes. I mean, there've been a few bright spots. You get your Paris Johnson Juniors, you get your Donovan Jacksons, but you also have guys that probably are not Big Ten players that are getting signed. I think that this year rectified it, but you did miss out on your huge dynamic potential left tackle, be it a Jordan Seaton or somebody like that. But I think that history will smile upon the Armstrong twins and more. And then I'm very intrigued with what, Gabe Van Sickle can be. Just as we've kind of mentioned, defensive line recruiting has not been there. I don't know if it's necessarily a star chasing situation. I mean, Ohio State should have moved in months ago on Dom Kirks. Plain and simple. I mean, he's in your state. He really wants to, have the option to go to Ohio State, which is, code for saying, I think that, if you offer him, he comes to Ohio State even now. I think that the net sometimes does get cast a little too wide, but with that being said, the state of Ohio hasn't held up its end of the bargain in a lot of years. And everybody's like, well, this team would be a lot better if they recruited Ohio more. Recruit Ohio when the kids are there. There have been plenty of years that the kids have not been there. They're just, the population shifts and everybody's like, I don't want to hear about that. Well, it's true. Why is the state of North Carolina recruiting so hot? Why is the state of Arizona recruiting so hot? Because your Rust Belt families are moving to other states to find opportunity. And some of your kids that may have been playing up in Cleveland are now playing in Chandler, Arizona, or Charlotte, North Carolina, and places like that. So I understand, talking about the star chasing, and I even do agree to certain extents, but good is good. And, generally your higher rated kids, and I'm not saying that the evaluators for 247 or Rivals or On 3, I'm not even going to put ESPN in the mix. Their evaluations are terrible. But I'm not going to say they're infallible, but they do a good job. And you're generally going to have a higher hit rate with your higher rated kids, but it's not absolute. I mean, but we also can't keep using the same tired excuse of James Laurinaitis was a 3-star. James Laurinaitis was a 3-star back during medieval times. I mean, that was a long time ago. So I don't know if we can necessarily, keep harping on that one.
Folks, we appreciate you being here. Typically every Wednesday, but of course these three, they tell me that they were busy yesterday. I don't know. I think they just were a bit lazy and put it off and figured they needed to show up at least today. So we rounded them up today.
Describe it.
But it's typically Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern time, folks. So we appreciate you being here, but you never know when we need to switch it up, especially during the holidays. We've got to organize 4 schedules. So please like these videos and subscribe here at the Voice of College Football, and check out Steve's work at Bucknuts. Steve, what's going on over there these days?
Not much. One of the things I did yesterday was I went to Eric Williams-Dixon. Not Eric. Sam Williams-Dixon, isn't it? I'm getting all the names confused. Sam Williams-Dixon.
He's the jack of all trades, right?
Yes, running back
Samuel type.
Pickerington North. He only got to play in like 5 games this past year, and I always thought it was injuries. And as it turns out, the OHSAA has rules about transfers, and there was a custody issue. And basically, you can move your residence from one place to another, but, I can't explain it entirely. But if all of your custody and everything doesn't check out perfectly, they have this rule that they default back to, that you're ineligible for the last half of the regular season in any sport and the postseason. And the coach there, Nate Hillerich, said, yeah, we could have gotten an attorney and fought this, but the kind of feeling was he really had nothing to prove to anybody because he was already committed to Ohio State. They had a good enough team, and he made a great impact in the 5 games that he played. I guess he had 475 yards in the 5 games that he played. He did have a hamstring injury that kept him out of week 2, I think. I don't remember who they played, maybe an out-of-state team. But at any rate, very intriguing to kind of hear that story. I'd always thought it was injuries, but I guess it was this. Again, I want to swear, these stupid rules that the OHSAA has. They've got a basketball kid up in Cleveland right now, TJ Crumble, one of the top players in the country, who they're trying to screw around on this. He moved from Lutheran East to the powerhouse at Richmond Heights, and he established residence within the Richmond Heights village. And they're trying to say, well, the family hasn't sold the other house where they lived before. And I'm just like, that's not the OHSAA's function. If they tell you he's established residence in this spot, that should be it. I don't understand where they get off, dictating to people. I mean, I know that they put rules in place to prevent people from stockpiling talent with transfers and people living in one place and playing somewhere else, but that's really not the case in either of these situations. And a judge yesterday granted Crumble an injunction. He can play the whole season at Lutheran East, which that's great. But any rate, I saw Sam Williams-Dixon yesterday. Very intrigued by him. I'm going to have a story about him on our site probably later today. Last basketball home non-conference game today, 6 p.m. against New Orleans on Big BTN Plus. So about 30 people will get to watch it. In my preview, you guys will get a kick out of this. I said, fans living in Central Ohio may attend this game. That's exactly how I put it. You are permitted. This is not a COVID game. You are permitted to purchase a ticket and drive down there and go to this game. So we'll see. They haven't had more than 10,000 for only 2 games so far this season. We'll see how that goes. And I did get to go to Atlanta last weekend for the UCLA game. A lot of fun that was. And looking forward to when UCLA brings that hack and hold brand of defense to the Big Ten next year.
Yeah, I guess they play the physical basketball on the West Coast.
God.
They kind of trade reputations when it comes to football and basketball.
Well, it's Mick Cronin. Mick Cronin, he has his players basically fouling on every possession and daring the officials to call it. But, whatever.
I made a early New Year's resolution the other day to not call my viewers morons and idiots on a regular basis, or maybe not at all.
Or your guests.
I was part of, I don't do that to my guests. Come on. I at least draw that line. More affectionately call them knuckleheads. They seem to be okay with that at times. So knuckleheads. But Dredd made another stupid comment about, but I did make this condition. I can call their actions moronic and idiotic. So we get through it that way. But that the 247 or other recruiting services ratings don't matter. And that's just complete garbage. They do matter. This is obvious to everyone who has a functional brain. All right, Tony, what have you been working on? Not that I don't know, but
I'll be right. I'll got to finish up an Air Noland story that'll go up today. Ryan Day's thoughts on Air Noland, the quarterback, 5-star quarterback out of Carrollton, Georgia. And then I'll also put together what I know, what I think, what I wonder about the recruiting class for today or tomorrow. That'll be available at the BuckeyeHuddle.com on the message board there for subscribers.
Kevin.
I'm already ready to move on from recruiting. I probably will sit down and start working on a defensive players to know piece for Missouri, whether or not that goes today or tomorrow. I guess it depends on how motivated I can be at this point. I got to start working on tail of the tape because the game will get here before you know it. And once you get down to the bowl site, time to sit down and noodle through a long piece like that is not there. So I'm going to need to sit down and start working on that. I put the entire 7 hours in two different segments on the Big Me kickoff feed of our show from yesterday. So, it's like Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness. You got two different discs there to listen to. The first one a little bit more subdued, the second one a little bit more energetic. I probably will do a by the numbers piece from the recruiting class. That I'll throw that out by the end of the week too, as I want to kind of wait and see what might happen with Dominic Kirks before I really try to put any cappers on this class, because I'm just OCD enough to let that drive me crazy if I were to write a piece, something were to change, and then hate the piece because it was not complete.
I was throwing out the topic last week that maybe Ohio State's got its next quarterback right in its quarterback room right now, and maybe they just need to focus on their young players and develop and not go after an experienced quarterback. And Tony, of course, said that there is no way that this team should ever field a freshman quarterback as its starter. And I'm not debating that. Steve has some thoughts on Air Noland as well.
Yes. Well, you think about Air Noland coming in, and Ohio State's had freshmen who have started at quarterback. Terrell Pryor back in 2008, I think was the year. And then Braxton Miller in 2011, the fickle year, as we like to say in these parts, the year that, it's kind of like when Ohio State plays an SEC team in a bowl game like Arkansas or Missouri, the rank and file SEC teams just say, oh, that didn't count. Well, that 2011 fickle year is the one that didn't count for Ohio State. But neither of them started the first 2 or 3 games of those seasons, which is kind of indicative that it's hard for a head coach to turn over the reins completely to a true freshman. But it will be interesting if he comes in and knocks everybody's socks off this spring, that he would be the guy. What I wanted to share was what Coach Day had to say about Air Noland. I had it all queued up here. Let's just see. He said he is somebody who is special in a lot of different ways, the way he conducts himself and the way he handles himself. He has a very high end. He's very athletic, and he's going to be the leader of this team. That's very telling. Air Noland is ranked number 36 overall nationally in the composite. So this is one of the higher rated quarterbacks with Miller, with Pryor, with some of the other guys that they've brought in over the years. So to me, it's exciting to see what happens with him. His statistics, I asked Steve Wiltfong, I said, because I do a story talking to our experts about the class, and I said, why did he have 4,000 yards and 55 touchdowns last year and it fell off dramatically this year? He's like, well, some of that had to do with the supporting cast around him. Jelani Thurman in particular, a tight end, is now at Ohio State, was with him as a junior, the year before. And, you just have to chalk things up. I mean, it's a different year. It's an entirely different team, and you just don't know what happened. He said, I'm going to take my chances with a guy who I have seen with my own 2 eyes throw for over 4,000 yards and 55 touchdowns and a high percentage the year before, and not really worry too much that maybe he didn't meet those very high benchmarks in his senior year. And, I watched him at spring practice for Ohio State last year. He came in and was watching the Buckeyes, and he's standing right there in the huddle. The players are 5 yards off the ball. He is right down front and central studying everything and watching it like a hawk. So that's kind of what I like to see out of a quarterback, a guy who is a student of the game. He's not over there, screwing around, with the guys who don't play. He is right there studying what Ohio State's doing. And so I think he's going to come in and shake some things up this spring.
Yeah, not only the loss of Jelani Thurman, but they were a little bit more run-based with Justice Savage, the running back who flipped from Indiana to Jacksonville State. So big win for Rich Rod there, landing Justice Savage, a running back that is very intriguing. Ohio State fans are like, oh, maybe they should take a look at him. Well, I don't know. I don't know if it would translate there, but I think at Jacksonville State he'll be able to rip it up. But yeah, I agree with what Wiltfong told Steve there, because the supporting cast certainly was not quite as strong this year at Langston Hughes as it was the year that they won the state title.
Just looking at the comment there from Kevin Barlow about Ohio State having 0 rushing touchdowns from its starting quarterback over the past 3 seasons. Air Noland, will he run it all? He can run. He's not a runner. He's a thrower. He's a passer. But Ryan Day did talk about his athleticism. And in terms of if a true freshman is going to start at Ohio State, I think that means something has gone wrong with the rest of the room. Now, Air Noland's going to walk into a room with one career quarterback start, and that'll be Devin Brown in the Cotton Bowl. So if there's ever going to be a year where a freshman is going to win a job, it's going to be the year where there's no established starter and really very little playing time for any of the other guys. And he's enrolling in the winter, and he's going to go through winter workouts and spring practice. And Lincoln Keenholz didn't get into school until last June. So this will be his first winter, his first spring. So in that way, you're almost on even footing in some form with Air Noland this coming spring. But I still, like I said, if it happens for Ryan Day, something has gone wrong. When it happened for Jim Tressel is because something went wrong. It was Terrell Pryor got kicked out of college, and so Braxton Miller had to step in when Joe Bosman, who was a baseball player, was now thrust into playing football. And it takes a lot more than just a good, true freshman quarterback to come in. But there's no established starter returning for Ohio State, and very little established playing time, very few snaps. So it's not like anybody has a huge lead on Air Noland, or it's as small of a lead for a true freshman quarterback at Ohio State as we've seen in some time.
Since it's the holiday season, you brought up Bowserman, and I did indirectly a moment ago. That's the opposite of a wonderful life, because he was on the boat everybody died. So yeah, that.
Yeah. So do we think that possibly Ryan Day's approach to this quarterback situation and acquiring a quarterback is going to be impacted at all by how many players come back?
Well, I think if a bunch of players leave, there's more money to offer a starting quarterback in the portal. I think a lot of the money right now is tied up in bringing those guys back. And really the numbers out there for starting quarterbacks, it's ridiculous. And it's the market needs to, I think we're seeing the fact that some of these starting quarterbacks that are out there, these quarterbacks are asking for $2.5 million. They're still asking for it. Like, hey, why aren't people giving us this money yet? I think if that stuff comes down, then maybe Ohio State goes and tries to get somebody for half of that, because, $2 million for a 1-year rental that you're not sure is going to be that much better than what you've got. And the guys you've got, if they start this year, they're going to be better next year. And so you're weighing a bunch of stuff there. And just bringing in somebody new when you don't know how good they're going to be, and they're asking for an outrageous amount of money. And I guess it's only outrageous if they can't get it, and right now they're not getting it. So do you wait for the market to come back to you? And I think maybe they are, but they like guys out there. They like guys out in the portal, but the numbers are out there. Ohio State's not desperate, and there are schools that may be desperate, but they're not so desperate right now that they're giving Cam Ward $2.5 million.
I mean, I use as an example of going out and getting a portal quarterback, Spencer Sanders, going from Oklahoma State to Ole Miss. He never was able to take the job away from Jackson Dart, and just to add insult to injury, now he's academically ineligible. so he wouldn't be able to play in the bowl game if he wanted to. So, or if Lane Kiffin wanted him to. And I'm not saying that any of the portal quarterbacks out there right now are necessarily, this, vis-a-vis, this is going to happen somewhere else, but you are delaying the development of what your room has by bringing somebody else in. You do run the risk of running guys off, and there's just no guarantee that somebody being plopped into a new system is just suddenly going to take to it and put up CJ Stroud type of numbers. So, I've kind of gone back and forth a little bit on this. There was a point where I was like, I really do think Ohio State should after the Kyle McCord departure, maybe they do need to go get a portal quarterback in terms of a frontline guy. Now, I don't know. Because you run the risk if you sit there and you wait until the bowl game and you go through the bowl game and everything else, what's going to be left out there at that point? But, you really just kind of send a bad message of, going out and just getting somebody else. Well, you're all replaceable. We can go and just get somebody, it only costs money at that point for us to go and get somebody else. So I think they're going to have to get a portal quarterback to kind of fill the ranks. I think the days of having 4 scholarship quarterbacks may be difficult just based on the sheer mobility that we see of kids through the portal. And now that we've had the injunction to where there's not even a slowdown on second-time transfers or anything else, but do you go out and find somebody in the mold of a Chris Chugginoff or a Gunnar Hoke to kind of add to the numbers? Just most recently Tristan Gebbia. I think that's something that you do, and I think that, to Tony's point, that asking price is much lower.
Yeah, the best quarterbacks in the country are moving on to the NFL, or they're staying with their teams because they're well compensated and they play for the top programs. I see a bunch of tier 2 guys. They're good quarterbacks. They're solid, but there's a lot of them. The list is deep, but I don't see the top end guys that are going to produce at Ohio State like Ohio State is accustomed to. I just maybe KJ Jefferson would be the guy. Cam Ward, of course, looks like he's going elsewhere. Will Howard is signed at USC. And Steve, to your point, where you want to take this to finish us out, is what a sad state of affairs. I say this about every day, that we've got a Cotton Bowl in about a week or so.
There's a game?
There's a game.
What?
Game.
What?
It used to be a big deal.
Who's playing?
I don't know. Mississippi, Missouri.
I wanted to throw in there that, first of all, I talked to somebody who is at practice every day, and he said that Marvin Harrison goes and doesn't wear the full uniform and is just kind of on the sidelines, kind of like what Chris Olave was doing. And this could be a case that Coach Day is allowing him to, as he said yesterday in the press conference, to do his own thing. And if he gets down to Dallas and gets a hankering to play, then maybe he would play. But I can't imagine holding a $40 million lottery ticket that he's going to suit up and play in that game. It was very interesting. Clay Hall tried to press him 3 different ways about who's playing in the game. We found out, obviously, last week that Emeka Yuka, Burke, Tyleik Williams, Donovan Jackson, Jack Sawyer, they're all going to play in the game. Cody Simon is going to play, and he's also coming back for 2024, which made perfect sense since he could come back if we believe that Chambers and Eichenberg are done, that he would be a starter next year. I believe I believe Eichenberg's done. Chambers, I don't know what NFL value he has, and if he wants to come back to improve his stock or what. I don't, maybe a late round pick. I don't know. So he was asked 3-4 different ways about the big 3, which are Marvin Harrison, Travion Henderson, and JT Tuimoloau. We never got a chance to talk to them last week. They are not listed currently to be interviewed at the Cotton Bowl site next week, although Jerry Emig, the sports information director, said don't read anything into that. If those guys are going to play in the game, they'll be added to the list and they'll be interviewed down there. So the door is open, it sounds like, for them to play. He was asked 3-4 different ways, and it's word salad. You have to look through what he said. He never once said they have practiced in full pads and are full go for this game. Never once. No, he said they're there. They've been out there. What does that mean? Like, I was told Harrison's out there. He's on. I presume they're practicing strictly indoors because it's too cold a lot of these days to go outside. And, the game's inside anyway, so practice indoors. I presume he's on the indoor field while they're practicing is what that means. So I guess long story short is I don't look for any of the big three to play in this game. But, stranger things have happened, I guess.
Yeah, Day said, yeah, they're at practice. But
yeah.
Everybody's
and
at
no one
practice.
really pushed him on it. He was having a hard day already, so I think everybody just kind of let him off the hook.
Well, you had the 2 stop downs as well and everything else. I mean, it was probably one of the more disjointed pressers of the Ryan Day tenure at Ohio State. But thankfully, they came to their good senses and did it in person as opposed to a Zoom call. I could have only imagined just if it were a Zoom and the phone call came in or whatever, it would have been a lot easier to say, well, we're done. And that would have been that. And we would have missed
we got a lot of great stuff.
Missed some good reactions to the Edric Houston news and things like that.
Yeah. I thought on the whole it was a pretty good session, and he showed a lot of humanity, I think, with his he slumped his shoulders and, practically collapsed at the podium when the word came in that Smith was going to sign with Ohio State. So that was a real-time reaction that you don't normally get on National Signing Day. So that was kind of cool. But I thought on the whole, there was a lot of ground covered, and some of it to the fans' satisfaction and some of it not. But that's the way it is. And people on our message boards, they wear their heart on their shirt sleeve there. I mean, it's pretty telling, where people stand. Larry Johnson good, Larry Johnson bad. Quarterback situation, so on and so forth. So, to me, offensive line recruiting, not where it needs to be. Ian Moore's an intriguing guy in this class from Indiana. Can he come in and push for a 2-deep spot like Montgomery did this past year? That'll be interesting to see. And, I think they've got candidates on the offensive line. It's Justin Fry time to earn his money next year. I think the third year will be the telling year, a contract year for him, no doubt.
My initial response to Ryan Day slumping his shoulders and giving that big sigh of relief was, man, he's making it look like he's a prisoner at hostage to these kids who signed these. But then I thought, you know what, Mark, don't overthink. I know he is. I was thinking that's a bad look is my initial reaction. Then I thought, you know what, Mark, don't be critical. Let him be a person. That's fine. All right, Steve Hellwagon, Bucknuts 247 Sports. Join him, Tony Gerdeman, of course, from Buckeye Huddle. The podcast is dropping just about every day, right, Tony?
Yeah, we'll drop one later today talking about the recruiting class. And as Kevin did, we also dropped the whole 7 hours in the feed for the Buckeye Weekly from yesterday as well.
Kevin Noon, of course, Buckeye Huddle as well. Also, the Big Me podcast. Join him right there, and he's got all sorts of numbers and facts and stuff circling around in his brain that he's going to spew out at some point when he feels comfortable. That's what it sounds like. All right, folks, join us back here each and every week. Buckeyes Live right here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you being here.